to commemorate, to go back in time, to reminisce. We see it as part of the ongoing process. We see the necessity for us to tell the story of what has happened to the nationalist community in the last 20 years. So, without further ado, I'll invite our first speaker, who is Michael Farrell, to address you. Gordon Mahagov.
The reason the civil rights movement took place at the time that it did here in the north of Ireland was that there was a coming together of two strands. There was a worldwide revolt of students and young people in the 1960s, and there was the gradual smouldering of rebellion against the conditions in which the nationalist minority here in the north of Ireland were living. And it was when those two currents came together that it sparked off the civil rights movement. Some of us were old enough to hear of the Cuban Revolution in 1959 and to see pictures on the newsreel screens of the bearded guerrillas coming in from the mountains into Havana and chasing out the Batista dictatorship. Some of us saw on the television or the newsreels the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa in 1960, when 60 or 70 black people were gunned down by the South African police for protesting against the pass laws. People who were a bit younger than that saw the start of the black civil rights movement in the United States, saw on television a massive march of 250,000 people in Washington demanding their rights, and heard Martin Luther King make his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Then we saw the Vietnam War. American troops intervened in Vietnam in 1965. And nightly after that, we were treated to the spectacle of children burned with napalm, of a famous picture of a South Vietnamese officer shooting a handcuffed prisoner in the head in the streets. The horrors of Vietnam were brought home to us night after night. That's the sort of atmosphere in which young people were growing up in the late 1960s. And it suddenly all came to a head around 1967-68. As I said, Che Guevara was murdered in Bolivia in October 67. And Che was a symbol of revolt to the youth of that period. A romantic revolutionary, an Argentinian who had fought for the freedom of the Cuban people. And when they had achieved that, he went on seeking new peoples to free. He went to fight in Africa, in the Congo, and he went to Bolivia to try and free the Bolivians. And he died there. His death was an inspiration to a whole generation.
Gracias, welcome, Bernadette McAllister.
1947 was the first time where the Catholic working class, if they could pass those intellectual exams that they still impose on us to this day, could at least make it through to the universities. And it's very interesting if you study. You go 7 years to primary school, and you go 7 years to grammar school, and you go 3 years or 4 years to university. And that takes you to 17 years. And if you count from 1947 and add on 17 years, you come to the first generation of university-educated Catholic working class. Now, they were the John Humes, people who came out round about that time. They were the people who were allowed to rise off the floor. And because they got further off the floor, they got nearer to the ceiling. Because the one thing that has changed and will never be able to be turned back over 20 years is the people who live here. And you think just for a minute, outside of the nostalgia of it, you think of the reality of what we have come through. We marched peacefully on the streets and we got beaten off them. We marched within the law and they changed the law, so we were acting illegally. We continued to march peacefully but illegally and they continued to beat us up. They came and they invaded our areas and they shot up our people and they attacked our ghettos and they burnt our houses. And we still didn't quit. And then the British Army arrived, as history tells us, to save us. The gallant knights of the British Army came galloping in for a number of weeks to save the Catholics. John Hume believed it then. He threw me out of Derry on my neck. for saying I don't think that's right, John. Listen, I said it very moderately now. I said it very